Last night I slept for 8.5 hours. That is a lot of sleep time for me. And this afternoon, I probably could take a nap. I just feel very drained and tired, and I just thought this is a great opportunity for me to explain to you one of the great paradoxes of ministry and missions that I see both in the Bible and in my own human experience. And that is that when you go out to a period of extended service or missions, in my case, it was Colombia for a week. It's exhausting work. There's really no time off. There's no days off, really. There have been times where I've gone to uh, China or to Cuba or to Romania, Africa, for extended weeks at a time, and there's never really a day off. There's no time off, really. And you just come home and you're physically exhausted and drained. And yet the paradox is that you also feel an extraordinary infilling, uh, a deep and profound satisfaction at the very moment that you're most exhausted. And I just thought I wanted to explain to you this experience, uh, both from the scriptures and from my own experience, this idea of being poured out and yet being indwelled or filled up at the same time, being spent, and yet at that moment feeling the riches of the grace of the gospel. What is this experience of being empty and yet filled at the same time? Our team is also experiencing the same thing right now. As I was coming back from Colombia, training about 1,200 pastors and leaders in the gospel of life, we had a team that went off to Cuba, and they spent in just 6 or 7 days, they crossed the entire island from Havana out to Santiago and all the way back across the island again, speaking, teaching, training people in crisis intervention, handing out ultrasound units to doctors to use in their various cities. There's very little food and water, just nutrition, medicine. Everything is a mess right now in Cuba, which means that everything just seems harder, and you see the people suffering. They got home just 3 days ago from Cuba, which is an exhausting trip, and are leaving today for Argentina. So we have 4 people literally on the planes right now, assembling in Miami and then heading down overnight flight to Argentina, and they will be training in 3 cities throughout Argentina over the next 6 or 7 days before they get back home. So my prediction is that they're going to come home totally exhausted and totally excited. This is the paradox that we see everywhere, and it's a paradox that the Apostle Paul seemed to allude to. I just want to read it to you. This is in Philippians chapter 2, verse 17. He says, "Even if I am to be poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you all." Paul saw his ministry in many ways. He saw the best way to describe his ministry using the Old Testament sacrificial language. He even told us all to offer ourselves up as a living sacrifice. So in this case, he's alluding to the Old Testament drink offerings, things that were just poured out as an offering to the Lord, wine most likely in these cases. And he's saying, I feel like I'm being poured out in order to bring to the Lord this sacrificial offering, which is the conversion of the Philippians to Jesus Christ. And he's saying, I'm going to bring you as my offering to the Lord, even though it costs me a lot, even though I feel drained, even though it's hard, even though it's absolutely draining of all of his energy. And in the history of the church, I've always noted people that basically put themselves at a lot of physical risk in order to do the work or the calling. I remember David Brainerd, for example. He died very young. I think he was about 29. But he was known for traveling on horseback. This is in the 18th century, from town to town, Indian village to Indian village, and so on and so forth, in hard rain, in snow, and cold, in order to preach the gospel. And of course, it just tore through his body. George Whitefield was known to preach 20, 30 times a week. And to do that, he had to keep moving from place to place to place to place on these mission trips to America and other places that he went. There are lots of people who know the exhaustion of ministry, but they don't know what we call burnout. And that's my experience too. A very exhausting ministry work. But the paradox is that you get a secret filling at the same time. The Apostle Paul, again, he says, even if I'm being poured out, I am glad and I rejoice with all of you. So he had exhaustion and joy working together. And that's my testimony too, and the testimony of our team, is that we go out and you pour yourself out and you come home utterly exhausted. But since you're doing what you think is the will of God, and since you get to see the grace of God unfolding in powerful and direct ways that you know bring glory to God, you come home with a sense of satisfaction that you can't know apart from this kind of faithful, obedient ministry. I discovered a long time ago that at least my solution to avoiding burnout was to make sure that I connect a sense of God's calling and the joy of what he's doing in me to the exhaustion that you feel and the lack of strength. In Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 10, it says, "The joy of the Lord will be your strength," or is your strength. And that's my testimony. I think we can see how exhaustion and joy can kiss one another, and you'll have this paradoxical experience of being dead tired and overwhelmingly filled with a sense of joy and satisfaction. I think it's a pretty good way to live. So whatever the Lord's calling you to do in your ministry, I would wish for you the same experience that me and my team are seeing on a very regular basis. God bless.